such a great song, and it really does tie exactly into the theme we've already announced for you this coming year. Our theme for 2008 is the words pleasing God, and that's exactly what we want to try to do. And we looked last week a little bit at 2 Corinthians 5 and verse 9, where in that case it told us that in everything we do, whether we're living or even when we go to be with Christ, we just want everything about us to bring pleasure to God. And if you remember that passage, it talked quite a bit in that text about the time when we will be in Christ's presence, and the idea of this body of ours being a tent that we travel in, and we can pick it up and tear it down, and God will do that someday for us. When I started to study through that concept of just the phrase pleasing God and wanted that to be our overriding theme for this coming year, I started thinking, okay, now how do I speak on that each time? Because I did some word studies, and there are some different directions we could have gone, and I thought, well, that's really good. I can hit this word and that word and spend a week on this and that, and some of that would be stretching it, I think, but it became something that made sense, but it was difficult. And when I finally concluded, I thought, you know what I need to do? I need to take people, real people, who somehow with their lives lived in such a way that they pleased God. And then I thought, okay, the easy one on that is just go to Hebrews chapter 11. So for the next couple of weeks, we're going to cover a few of the people found in Hebrews chapter 11. We've looked at that before a while back, but this time we're going to look at it from the viewpoint of how did they please God? Well, we'll see in verse 6, it's real easy. It's by their faith. But then we're going to say, okay, what did that cause them to do that marked them out as different from the ordinary person? And what did God see that he was impressed with in their lives that perhaps maybe we need to grab and put into our lives as well? When we talk about faith and pleasing God, and that's very important to talk about, I did want to differentiate for you. There's 3 levels of faith that are taught in the New Testament. The first one would be the saving faith. It's the faith that I take on myself that says Jesus Christ is who he said he is. He died on the cross. He died for my sins, and I accept him as my Savior. That many verses teach that. I just put up there on the screen Ephesians 2, 8, and 9, and I put that up there because this is not in your outline, so I thought this would help you a little bit. Another example of faith would be the doctrinal faith, which is the body of teaching that we believe in. It's all the things that make up Christianity. It's the volume of Scripture, and we accept that. We call that the faith, and so Jude talks about it, about defending the faith and what we believe in. And then there's probably another level of daily faith, a living faith, or however you want to. I was going to call it a living faith, and I thought, well, all faith is living faith, and so I didn't want to call it that. But again, back to 2 Corinthians 5 and verse 7 there, it talks about how we walk by faith, not by sight. And so that's a daily, every day, everything we do is a trust and a faith in Christ and our God and following him. Now, I don't have this on the screen, but this is not a surprise, but there's, as far as Christians and being a part of the faith of God, there's 2 levels in which we can go, maybe the 2 extremes. And it would be those who stand, and they stand for the faith, and they do what's right, and then there's those who shrink, who maybe fall by the wayside some level, and that's fine. Tonight, if you come back, we're going to study the idea of can you or can you not lose your salvation? Is there a possibility for people to fall so far that they were once saved and now they're no longer saved? And if you come to that, you'll find out that I'm going to say no. But anyhow, we'll differentiate some of that tonight. But if there are some who stand firm and there are some who shrink away, I think you and I want to be those who endure. We want to be those who stand firm and do the right things. This is a new start of a year, so if that's what you need to do, if you need to say, I have a break and I want to go forward, from this moment on, I want to do better, or whatever you want to say, this is the time to do it. As we're looking at Hebrews chapter 11, I'm going to jump right into verse 6, because tucked in the middle of this chapter that is the Hall of Faith is verse 6, which just very simply says, and without faith, it's impossible to please God. And that's the reason why we're going to chapter 11, to see how is it that we please God. And we see that it is our faith in God. It's that saving faith. It's that doctrinal belief faith. It's the daily living faith that we have that pleases God, because anyone who comes to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. So we need to have a belief that God is there. And of course, that's what our faith is. It's understanding that God is there and that we can trust him. And then we need to seek him out every day. Now, he seeks us. That's true. But we need to have a heart that longs for God and want to know him, trust him, and go at him. So therefore, our faith must have an object. It's just not a blind faith like, I believe in believing. No, we don't do that. We have an object, and our object is God. The proper object of our faith is God, and he's the one who earnestly seeks. So just to give an overview, I want to just grab a couple things out of Hebrews chapter 11. And as we go back and look at the first 3 verses, we see things, for instance, I'll just read verse 1. It says, now faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. We're going to see a number of people listed here that are encouragements to us as we go through this chapter. They are encouragements to us to persevere in our faith because they persevered in their faith. And there was value in it. There were wonderful things that came. Faith, as verse 1 says, is assurance and it's conviction. Faith is described as being sure. It's you're convinced, you know it's right, it's true, it's sure, because your faith has helped you do that. Faith is absolutely certain that what it believes is true and that what it expects will come. That's what faith is. You're absolutely convinced. Doesn't matter what everybody else believes, you know for sure that this is true and what God has said will come about. You know that's true. Faith gives reality and proof to the things unseen. Recently, a week ago, I got an email from a friend, a younger guy. He happens to be a coach in soccer in our greater area. And I've known him for a few years. I remember when he was in school, he competed against Josh's age group. And I remember him. He was a great player, and he became coach at his alma mater. And he's been coaching for the last few years. And to be honest with you, he's an okay guy, just not real easy to get along with. And I got this email from him about 8 or 9 days ago that just blew me away. He was telling me that there was a certain event that he was hoping I'd be at, and I couldn't. I had a conflict and wasn't there. And he said he was hoping I would be there because he wanted to talk to me. Then he went on in this email to detail what his life has been like, the sinfulness of his life, and just just incredible bad stuff that he told me. And then he told me, and I knew this had to be coming. I was hoping this was coming. Then he told me about how he found Christ, and now he's a believer, and he had been a believer for about, at that time, maybe about 6 weeks, and hadn't seen me. And he said, my pastor told me that I need to share my faith with others. And he started telling me all about how this has helped. But he also noted in there that his brother, who was a couple, maybe 2 years older, and they were teammates, and I mean, they were close like brothers are, that his brother is a youth pastor. Now, I just read to you a phrase from my notes that said, faith gives reality and proof to the things unseen. His brother lived for Christ. And he saw that all the time, but never grabbed it, didn't believe it. It made absolutely no sense to him. But now he wasn't thinking of this sermon, but in his email to me, he started telling me about how real Jesus was, and he never knew it. And he never caught it, and his brother lived it all the time, but he didn't see it. He lived an immoral life, a life of personal abuse and all kinds of things. And it wasn't until he found Jesus Christ that what seemed so silly and so far-fetched and so irrelevant all of a sudden became the most important thing in all of life. And he was telling me how his life has changed and how exciting things are. And I wrote back to him and said, I didn't even know how to respond. I mean, I was overwhelmed. This was so exciting to me. And I wrote back to him and I said something about, it's got to be really exciting, because it was right around the Christmas and New Year's time. I said, it must be really exciting for your family to have a new husband and a new daddy. And then he wrote back and started saying just how much fun everything is. And so it's true that the faith puts meaning to things that other people don't see at all. But it's got to be a real faith, okay? It can't be something that we just make up and say, well, it's been passed on for generations and therefore it's mine and I guess it's okay. And yeah, it can't be that way. We've got to know Jesus Christ. I wrote to myself that this gentleman never saw the reality until he came to Christ. And now everything in life is different. I bet colors are brighter to him. Everything's just totally different to him. Well, verse 2 in here tells us about those ancient heroes of the faith. These are people from the Old Testament, mostly pre-Christian era. And it tells us in there, and it also says in verse 39 that they are commended, that they're being commended. And that's the point of Hebrews 11. These people are being commended to us because these are people of faith. These are not people of great talent. They're not necessarily the best vocalists of their day. They may not be the best athletes of their day. They might not even be the best thinkers or debaters or whoever. They are people who trusted God. That's something you and I can do and should do. These are people of faith. And the scriptures tell us that they were commended. These witnesses, and I think I counted about 17 that are named, and a whole bunch more of categories that are not named, were all called upon because they're telling us of the value and the worthwhileness of faith. This is important stuff, is what they're trying to communicate to us. Interesting, in verse 3 is thrown in the idea that the universe was formed, not evolved, it was formed out of nothing. There's a phrase that's used among theologians, and it means absolutely nothing. There's nothing there, and it came into existence. And I think the premise here is that it takes faith to believe in creation. It takes faith to believe that there's a God who created everything. That's not a surprise, is it? Maybe this is a surprise. I don't think it will be. It takes faith to believe in evolution. It takes a lot of faith to believe in evolution. You have to believe, because, by the way, there's not film at 11. That's the reason why. And as much as they will tell you that there are missing links, there are no missing links, or at least none ever found. They will tell you that they've got this, everyone's been proven wrong and bogus and scandalous and everything else. It takes faith to believe in one or the other. I think it takes incredible, miraculous faith to believe in evolution, as opposed to a God who loves us and did this for us. But that's my thoughts. But when you come down to the end of chapter 11 and you go to verse 32 down to verse 40, you're going to see people named, categories described, all kinds of violent acts that have happened to these people of faith, and yet they persevered. And in verse 39 it says, "These were all commended for their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised." Now don't get defeated and discouraged. It is not saying that they went through all this garbage for their faith and it turned out to be of no good. That's not what it's saying. It's saying they lived in faith, but the thing that they were all longing for, the Messiah, they never got to see in flesh. They didn't get to see him because he didn't come until later, after their time. Verse 40 says, "But God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect." The better for us is the fact that we live on this side of the cross. And we have the experience of knowing that Jesus Christ, the anointed one, the Messiah, the Christ, has come, has given his life, has died, has risen again, and we know that. These people were commended because they were looking forward to that, and they didn't have what you and I have, and they were looking forward to that, and yet they still persevered, and they faced horrible, horrible things, but they stayed steadfast because they knew it was true, they knew it was real, and they knew God was going to come through like he said he would. You and I have seen that happen. So we have the advantage of saying, I can stand firm too, because I know that what they were looking forward to became real, became true. And I know that Jesus Christ has come and has given his life for us. Well, it is better for us. So with that in the background, can we go backwards again and go to verse 4 in Hebrews 11 and read this? By faith, Abel offered God a better sacrifice than Cain did. By faith, he was commended as a righteous man when God spoke well of his offerings. And by faith, he still speaks, even though he is dead. There we're introduced, the very first person in the hall of faith that God wants us to know about, not Adam, not Eve. It wasn't the older brother Cain, it was the younger brother Abel. Abel that was introduced to us because of his offering. And it says the reason that his offering was accepted is because it was given by faith. Well, let's go back and just think about what happened between Cain and Abel. I'm going to read to you verses out of Genesis chapter 4. This is the actual account of what came about between these two brothers. Genesis is the first book in the Bible. I think chapter 4 follows chapter 3. So I'm going to begin with verse 1 and probably read about 10 or so, maybe 16 verses to you, straight through. Adam lay with his wife Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. She said, "With the help of the Lord I have brought forth a man." Later she gave birth to his brother Abel. Now let me just say something about their names real quick. The name Cain has to do with the fact that it was difficult, and this is the first human birth that took place, probably. I don't think there was a sister born before that. That wouldn't have been recorded. Sisters happened, and they probably had several, but those were not recorded. But Cain was perhaps the very first human birth, and you kind of get the impression that Eve said, man, that was not going to happen if God didn't do this. And anyone who ever delivered a child probably understands that. I have not. And just in case you were wondering. And Abel was the second born son, and his name could have a lot of different possible meanings, but one of them would be short-lived, meaningless, and things like that. Well, anyhow. Now Abel kept flocks and Cain worked the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord, but Abel brought fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. He was depressed. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must master it." Now Cain said to his brother Abel, "Let's go out to the field." And while they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where's your brother Abel?" "I don't know," he said. "Am I my brother's keeper?" The Lord said, "What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth." Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is more than I can bear. Today you've driven me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." But the Lord said to him, "Not so. if anyone kills Cain, he will suffer vengeance 7 times over. Then the Lord put a mark on Cain so that no one who found him would kill him. So Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Wow, what an event in history, the first murder that takes place. And did you notice that God somehow marked, we don't know how, maybe put a Nike swoosh on his forehead. I don't know what he did, but somehow he marked Cain so that if everybody saw him, he would know who it is. Cain's fear was that people were going to see him and want to murder him. And God said, no, this is a mark for protection. And if anybody does that to you, I will do 7 times. You just heard it. You know what it says. Abel was the one who kept sheep. Cain was the one who kept the ground. He tilled the ground, did crops. God required from them an offering. They needed to bring an offering. Abel somehow obeyed, and his offering included the blood of his sacrifice. Cain brought an offering, but somehow his was not acceptable. Cain may have been sincere in bringing whatever it was, we don't know, but whatever it was not enough. Some of the scholars would say that we don't know what kind of an offering on this occasion God was asking for. In the Old Testament system, there were a number of kinds of offerings, some that required grain sacrifice and some that required a blood sacrifice. A sin offering would require a blood sacrifice. And we don't know exactly what they were asking for. I really lean toward it was to be a blood sacrifice, but can I prove that 1,000%? No, but it makes a lot of sense. But we don't know what they were looking for, but I'm not so sure that the blood or the lack of blood is the only factor in this sacrifice. In verses 11 and 14 in Hebrews 9, you can see a description of how what really pleases God is a sacrifice that includes a blood sacrifice. But my question would be, was it his presentation, what he gave, or was it the heart behind it? It must be through faith that we're to please God, and that's stated so well in Hebrews 11:6 that we need to come by faith. It tells us there clearly in verse 4 that the reason that Abel's was accepted was because it was by faith. So it's implied, I think, that Cain's was rejected because it was not offered by faith. But maybe to some level he was just going through the motions, or it was a formality, or maybe that he did it on his own terms. He didn't want to do what God told him to do. He did it his way instead of God's way. We do have a little bit of help in 1 John chapter 3, verse 12. In 1 John 3:12, it starts off by telling us that it says, "Do not do like Cain, who belonged to the evil one and murdered his brother." And why did he murder his brother? Why did he murder him? Because his own actions were evil and his brothers were righteous. That's what John tells us as far as insight into the situation between Cain and Abel. Cain's actions were evil and Abel's actions were righteous. My, oh my, how evil hates right. Isn't that true? Sometimes if you stand up for what's right and you consistently stand up for what's right and you stay firm on standing for what's right, just watch. There will be people who don't like you. There will be people they'll find the chink in your armor and they'll multiply that and share that and build that up in their own minds and sharing with other people. There'll be lots of things that they'll find. Just stand for what's right consistently. Just do that, and you'll find that people will attack. Hopefully they won't take you out in the field and kill you and bury you. Hopefully that won't happen, but they will go against you. I believe that's absolutely true. In chapter 12, verse 24, it references Abel and says that, in Hebrews 12:24, and says that his sacrifice involved a blood sacrifice, and it's called there a better word is what it says. So in every sense, Abel did the right thing. He gave a blood sacrifice, which may have been living by the letter of the law, and maybe that's what God wanted, but we know that his heart was right. He gave out of faith. He did what was required of him, as opposed to Cain, who took the easy way out. I would say about Abel that he had such a strong faith in God. He believed so strongly in him that he was driven to obedience in following God. If God said to him, I want a blood sacrifice, I want a sacrifice. Cain said, well, I'm going to bring grain. And God says, well, I really like blood sacrifice. Abel would say, I'll do a blood sacrifice. And I have a funny feeling that if God said, and I want you to stand on your head while you do this, I'll bet you Abel's practicing standing on his head many hours a day, because it just seems like his heart was so attached to his God that he wanted to do what was right. Maybe it's where I was raised or whatever, but growing up, I've seen this quote, and I wanted to give it to you. It's a William Penn quote. It's a great quote. It says, right is right, even if everyone is against it. And wrong is wrong, even if everyone is for it. I remember hearing that. I wish politicians would know that. I don't know what party you are, or I don't even know what party I am, and who's who and what's what. I heard some debates last night, snippets here and there, and I heard some really good things from all kinds of different guys and dolls. They all said some good stuff. I also heard things that I thought, that's not right. I just wish that we would understand that what we're required to do is what's right. And it doesn't matter what anybody else says or what anybody else does, you do what's right. I cannot tell you how many times in ministry, it's not millions, but several times in ministry, I've had people say to me, well, I'm not going to stand that strong or do that commitment thing because so-and-so doesn't, and this one's two-faced, and this one's hypocritical, and the answer is that doesn't matter. We're not talking about their lives, we're talking about your life, and your life is to always do what's right no matter what everybody else says or does. And if it's wrong, it's always wrong, no matter how many people voted into law or into favor or popular opinion. So your responsibility is to be driven by your faith to obedience to God as much as possible to the letter of the Word of God. Not just obedience, but obedience to the letter of the Word of God. He was driven, Abel was driven to do everything right. You know what, for you and I, if we're going to do that, if we're going to be people who please God and people who have faith that is the only thing that's going to please God, and if that's all the combination, we need to be driven to doing what's right, driven to obedience like Abel was, so that we can please God, then that means we need to know God, know His Word. In order to obey Him, we need to know what He's telling us to do. That's an important facet of our lives. We need to understand Him, study Him, worship Him, honor Him, daily fellowship with Him. Well, you know, as I look through this, and especially in verse 4, I'm going to see three things that Abel definitely did that came, three results of his faith. The first one is he offered a better sacrifice. His faith drove him to believe and to obey. He did what God wanted him to do. That was a great response. He did the motions. It caused him to live and do the things that God wants him to do. The second thing that I see was he was commended as a righteous man. That probably means that what he did, because of his faith and is driven to obedience, it was noticed by God. It was effective in his life. Now, by the way, he got murdered. I'm not so sure very many of us would say, wow, that's the result I was looking for. I don't think so. That's not what you're looking for. That's not what I'm looking for. But he in the eyes of God, was effective, and it worked, and it did what God wanted him to do. And the third thing I see, and this is from the text, he still testifies to us, and I would say today. He testifies to us. How do you like that? This guy lived somewhere from 6,000 to 8,000 years ago, and his life is still significant to speak to us. Many people that I know over the years that are gone, some of our dearly beloved, most dear saints, sometimes I can name somebody here in our church that maybe passed away 20 years ago, and the vast majority of you say, oh, I didn't know them. 20 years ago, didn't know them. One of the illustrations I use a lot in this concept is a few years ago, we lost two people relatively close together. They were who I think were probably the all-time backbone stalwarts of our church. Their names were Ora and Helen Lance. Now, I know a lot of you know them, but I remember about a year and a half later, 2 years later, talking to somebody in the church who said, I don't know that. Who were they? Don't know. 2 years after the persons who were the most important people in our church. Our testimonies, it's going to be significant what the people were significant with, but this guy, 6,000 plus years later, still speaks to us. Now, how does that happen? There's probably two ways that I've seen theologians say. One would be it could be a witness to us in the sense of he's a witness to our lives to tell us to remain faithful, and I think that's what Hebrews is telling us. Another possibility, which I think you get from the Genesis passage, is it could be that his blood still cries to God for vindication. He still cries out to God for vindication. We know that was true in Genesis because God said, I can hear his blood crying out. It's asking for judgment. By the way, in case you think, well, that's just an isolated situation, let's fast forward into the future, and in Revelation chapter 6, verses 9 and 10 and 11, and you have a bunch of martyrs around the throne of God during the tribulation period who are up there and crying to God, how long is it going to be before you get vengeance for us? So the blood does cry out. Well, here's what we know. Here's what we know. We know that God accepts faith. That's what he wants. We know that God only accepts faith. Cain gave an offering. Cain did religious service. Cain did his thing. Cain did what he thought was good and right in his own eyes, but that was not what God was accepting. It was by faith that God accepted Abel's sacrifice. We know we need to place our faith in Jesus Christ. We know there's a saving faith. We know there's a faith of a body of belief. We know that there's a following faith, a daily living faith. And we need to live that faith every moment of every day in order to honor God, to please him. That's what we want to do this year, every year. It's not a 2008 thing. You can't turn it on and off. It's what we need to do all year, every day, every moment. It's the greatest protection in our lives is if we live our faith for him. Will you pray with me? Father, thank you so much for just the teaching of people's lives and what we can learn from them, what we can apply to ourselves. God, you are so rich in everything, in wisdom, and in sharing with us how to live. You have given us everything that there is through Jesus Christ. We want to give our lives back. We want to live for you. We want to be people of faith, and we want to please you, God, with our lives in every aspect. And I just pray, Lord, today that you would speak to our hearts and challenge us to make that fresh agreement with you that no matter what's happened in the past, we want to live for you. We want to live for you from this moment on to bring glory to the name of Jesus Christ. We pray, God, that through your Spirit, through the Holy Spirit living in us, that you would empower us to fulfill those kinds of commitments and that we can honor and glorify Jesus. In his name we ask. Amen.